with reaction and insights to the biggest stories and breaking news from the USA, and a little bit of history thrown in. This is America, a history in the making. Welcome. It is Thursday, the 15th of August, 2024, and seeing as we're about to talk about the US election and the speed at which things change, I think it's very important to date this conversation that you're listening to. I'm joined on this episode of In the Making by a show regular, Emma Long. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, Liam.
Hello. I'm going to save the long introduction for the main episodes, I think.
Fair enough.
And we're also delighted to be joined today by Clodagh Harrington, who teaches politics at University College Cork. She's also the host of the US politics podcast, A Chicken in Every Pot, which we'll link to in the show notes as well. So do go and take a listen to that after you've listened to this. Welcome, Clodagh.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Great to see you both virtually, Emma and Liam, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. As Emma was saying before we hit record, I think people have heard our voices more than enough on this podcast. So it'll be nice to have your input on the state of the race and the US election, which is shaping up to be a lot more exciting than we sort of expected a month or two back, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we were just saying a while ago, that there was a feeling of, I don't want to say despondency, but certainly a lull, let's say, in terms of enthusiasm and motivation. And, you know, you had that feeling of, if the election was tomorrow, what would turnout be like? I think, in truth, it might have been pretty low, particularly on the Democrat side. Whereas now it does seem like there's been a shot in the arm, and it's kind of worked in two ways. I mean, when I was gathering my thoughts for this morning, I was thinking back to the assassination attempt on Trump and thinking, how long ago does that feel like now? It feels like forever. I don't know how it feels for him, but just as observers, it does seem like a very long time. And if you think of like the multitude of developments that have happened since then, I think the Biden stepping down, the fact that Harris rose so kind of, magnificently, I would say, really in that very short space of time. I mean, whether one is a Democrat supporter or not, the fact that she was just there and present and suddenly filling the space very authentically, I thought, was an impressive thing to see. And I guess the other side of that, the converse of that, for us as reasonably objective observers, is that, the Trump campaign must have had its own version of motivation, rather it's a positive or a negative one. It's like everyone is now fired up, and that has got to be good for democracy for sure, and maybe good for turnout, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely feels like there's a real energy and excitement about this election versus perhaps any since 2008 potentially. But Emma, we actually had an episode of the podcast go out on Tuesday where we spoke to Andrew Moran about two-term presidencies. And we didn't record it that long ago, right? But even then, we did not know the VP pick for Kamala Harris. And it feels like, Harris too was also still chasing Trump. We were still saying, this is Trump's to lose. That's changed, like, in the space of a week, really. That whole landscape has shifted.
Yeah, and I think it's testament to just how quickly things can move in American politics, that an assassination attempt, something that you would think would be sort of like a defining part of a campaign, right? We've just kind of moved past it right now, and now we're talking about four issues down the line from where we were there. So yeah, and obviously there's an element of the unknown. You've got Kamala Harris. What kind of candidate was she going to be? How quickly were Democrats going to support her, or were they going to support her? Was there going to be sort of an internal battle that would go all the way to the convention later this month? And then sort of it became clear that they were going to coalesce around her. We talked about sort of perhaps not wanting to have more infighting, since they'd been doing that for a period of time over whether Biden should stay or go. But then there was who's the vice presidential pick going to be, and also I think her campaign, she's it's quite upbeat, right? For various reasons. Biden's campaign was much more serious. Trump as the threat to democracy, and the danger of this sort of the existential questions that actually dogged the 2020 election as well. This is very serious. We're deciding on, it's a discussion about two potential visions of America that are very different, and you have to come down one side or the other. In a way that's still there. You've still got two very different visions of what America's future would be under two very different sort of presidents potentially. But the Harris campaign doesn't seem to be hammering so much on that. It's serious, but there's laughter and there are jokes, and one of the things I keep seeing talked about is like joy here in this, and that's energizing, right? After lots of years of really serious, kind of really depressing news, because there's lots of serious stuff going on nationally and internationally. There's an element of kind of going, yeah, but there's some fun stuff here too, and you can take it seriously, but you can still laugh. And I think after doom and gloom, that's actually quite energizing. And I think what you're seeing is people respond to that. And now the polls seem to suggest they're sort of level. Some of them put Harris slightly ahead, but within the margin of error. As I say, as we're recording this now, next week it might be different. So there's been a real kind of boost, I think, in enthusiasm, and again, like Clodagh said, that's good for democracy, right? To have people energized on both sides, so that there's actually a discussion and there's debate.
Yeah, I'm getting real vibes from this campaign, and go with me on this one, but I'm kind of getting vibes of what the Lib Dems did in the UK in 2010, in that they're sort of taking it, so in the Harris campaign is making it less about political divides and more about generational ones, and they've really found a way to speak to a whole generation of voters who may otherwise have been pretty apathetic about two 80-year-old white guys on the ticket, and she's really galvanising them. And I think the difference between Harris and what the Lib Dems are doing is that Harris is actually being really smart about it, leveraging social media in ways that we've not really seen before, and really tapping into sort of the zeitgeist and the trends of today. But kind of on that note, I think there was a surprise among many, because of how she was running her campaign, that she picked Tim Walz, who is an older white guy, and didn't really fit with that vibe that she was giving out, at face value at least. I mean, Clodagh, what are your thoughts on Tim Walz?
Yeah, well, I guess I would just quickly say that the kind of the joyful element, I've really noticed that as well, and I think it's a wonderful thing. I mean, one of the things I was listening to a few just clips of Walz's speeches online and that, just to get a sense of how he sounds and how he presents and everything. And one of the things that one little 2-minute clip yesterday from previously, he said that he's, they're working on a positive vision of this country that we all know is there. And I thought that really is such an attractive perspective to take. Then I was looking at the comments from Trump. It was at a news conference the other day at Mar-a-Lago, and he said we have a lot of bad things coming up, and he's predicting that the US could fall into an economic depression unseen since 1929 or whatever. It's like, you can run your campaign on fear or you can run your campaign on hope, and it really does seem now that there's a real a daylight between the two presentations. And I think Walz, I mean, I think it's probably reasonable to say he wasn't that well known amongst the general public. I mean, of all the, recent podcasts and chats and tweets and all the rest of it that I would have been engaging in, he wasn't top of the list. Everybody's talking about Shapiro and Kelly and various others, and it turns out to be him. And I mean, there's a lot of kind of humorous speculation prior to the announcement of the choice that it had to be like the safest, straightest, most middle-aged white guy ever in existence. And the thing is, like, he does tick those boxes. You know, he's Minnesota man. He's Mr. Nice Guy. He's Mr. Uncontroversial. But there's a real power, I think, in all of that as well. You know, he's like your kind of, you know, your decent uncle or whatever who's going to show up and is just there for good reasons, you know. So I think how he presents is really positive. What he brings is really important. And then that's the stuff. And again, you know, he isn't from one of the states that everybody's kind of lying awake at night worrying about. You know, he's not Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, whatever. You know, he's Minnesota. But he really, I suppose, he brings a comfort to the rural Democrat voter, because a lot of people will look at Harris and go, look at her, she's a bit coastal elite, you know, she's a bit female, she's a bit brown. There are things that are, for some people, a wonderful, refreshing a taste of the future, and for others maybe a little bit concerning because she's other or she's not what they are or whatever. And so you have that, like maybe the Vice President Biden to President Obama's offering in 2008, that similar kind of thing, you know, the decent uncle that you know you can trust. I think there's quite a lot of that about him. And what I have, the sense that I have of him so far, I really like what I've read and heard and seen. And I guess most importantly, the idea that he really can and already has, like on previous records, you know, being capable of winning over those kind of Midwestern, bit socially conservative, bit cautious about the unknown kind of voters that Democrats really need to rope in and take back from the GOP, because they kind of really grabbed them successfully in 2016.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, you mentioned about the difference between sort of running a campaign on hope and running on fear. It sort of reminds me a little bit of Obama in 2008, you know, that sort of, yes, we can, that sort of optimism about American future. And then, of course, you know, Trump's 2016 or 2017, I guess, inaugural address was like American carnage, right? It's that kind of, it's all dull, and you know, it's the future is not bright. America's falling apart. You know, we're losing the battles for this, that, and the other. And then 2020, of course, I think we forget a little bit, but it was in the middle of COVID. It was a very different campaign. Everybody felt, you know, the pressure of that. So it's been nice to see that sort of return of that optimism. And we know, right, Americans sort of are much more likely to buy into that. We're a great country, we can be great again, there's a positive future, we just have to claim it, right? It's a version of the American dream kind of argument. And what the Harris Walz campaign seemed to be doing is sort of tapping into that. And I think generally people want to hope for better, even if they don't necessarily see it right now. But also thinking about the idea of the balance of the ticket. I was watching the episodes of The Daily Show from last week. I'm just a big fan, and they were laughing because sort of a lot of Republicans, the message about Kamala Harris, because they don't seem to have settled yet on a way to attack her. One of the things that they're saying is that she's a diversity hire, right? It's kind of it's a dog whistle, right, about the fact that she's a woman of color, without them coming out and saying she's a woman of color and you can't trust her because of that. But you know, this talk about her being a diversity hire, and the Daily Show had like turned that round and sort of gone, well, you know, it has to be the VP pick has to be a old white guy. It's kind of, that's the diversity hire, right? That's the token, it's the token white guy on the ticket to balance the ticket, which it sort of made me smile, because obviously they're playing around with the, you know, the inverting of that. But yeah, I think Clodo's right. You know, there, you know, voters, when it comes to being about the person who's going to be in charge of your country, you know, you sort of want people to take it seriously and think carefully. And, you know, people are concerned, you know, about experience and how someone might deal with what the world might throw at them. And, yeah, there is that balance between the two of them.
One of the things that I really love about the Harris campaign is that, we're talking about this sort of opposite of, a campaign of fear versus a campaign of hope. That's not something the Democrats have been able to do very well against Trump in the last couple of elections. They've really played into the rhetoric that Trump has controlled, through a campaign, and they've been very responsive, and they've got kind of dragged down into these sort of dogfights. What I think Harris has done really well is, and the Democrats as a whole, is they've made this really conscious strategic decision to laugh it off and to treat everything, and therefore treat Trump and JD Vance as a bit of a joke. And it's really working. Like, I think more than they probably ever expected, or they would have done it 4 years ago. But, it's that just seems to be resonating more than this sort of back and forth attack that Biden kind of got dragged into.
It's laughing at the bully, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
and that disempowers them, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
It really does.
it just struck me when I was watching some of Kamala Harris's speeches last week, and actually Walz as well, and thinking about this narrative that sort of emerged, that started with Walz about the idea of calling Trump and JD Vance weird, right? It is that idea of, instead of taking them seriously and sort of trying to match them head on by saying, this is very serious, and this is an existential threat to the nation, and all the rest of it, which is what was being done before. It's laughing at the bully. And if you laugh at a bully, that's often the thing they like the least. It takes their power away. And what it seems to be doing is giving the Democrats the space. So rather than constantly having to react to the Republican campaign, it's creating space for them to have debates on their own terms. And that, Trump has been very successful since 2016 about sucking all of the oxygen out of the room, right, and taking all of the attention. And at the moment, the Harris-Walz campaign are managing to resist that surprisingly effectively.
Yeah, it's like they're taking back the microphone, to a certain extent. And I mean, it's so much harder, I think, to do that these days, because I'm thinking back to like 2008, when social media wasn't what it is now. There was Facebook and Twitter was in its infancy and whatever. So like it was more about broadly speaking, a kind of a single microphone in terms of like you what narrative you had. Whereas now, the strands and the tributaries, and they're just everywhere. It's so difficult to manage. And if we think about like the 2022 midterms, that all was run very much on in my understanding, Trump controlling the narrative, and the Democrats really doing that. Oh my God, you have to get out and vote, because otherwise, democracy is under threat. Now, it did work, because I think the polls show that Democrats did get out for a whole range of reasons, but one of them in part was that they were concerned about democracy. But now you have this, and just as you were saying it there, Emma, it just dawned on me that, the idea that making America great again, it's like that, the upside of that is the positivity of Harris and Walz and the America First narrative, which has become such, obviously, those are Trumpian words now. But like, when I think of what Biden did, it's like, that's America First. That's putting your country before your own political desires and before your party, everything. I mean, he did the most selfless thing that any politician can ever do. There is no better example of America First. So like, to kind of put your money where your mouth is, and then, as you say, take the microphone and start making fun of, what is essentially the bully, really, or the bullying tactics. I mean, I was looking at, I now follow Walz on Twitter, as I'm sure everybody else. He now has 1 million followers on Twitter, because a lot of people, would have signed up in recent times. And just that owning the kind of the comedy element, the Trump is weird, they're all weird, Vance is weird, whatever. It's harmless, it's funny, and it's probably more powerful than the other way of going, oh my God, we're all doomed if we don't vote against them. So I really like that. Now, the one thing I would say about it is that it's August. It is kind of silly season. Okay, everyone's on their holidays, everybody's in a bit more jovial humor. I would think, possibly predict, and maybe also hope that once it gets to September and everyone's kind of, back at their desks, if you like, that there will be some really serious accompanying policy detail and planning and vision and agendas and all the rest of it that will comfort people, because the memes and the humor and whatever will only kind of get you so far. So that's what I'll be curious to see, that in the end it probably is going to be about the economy, stupid, or some such, and they need to show that they can deliver on that.
But I think next week will be the platform, especially for the Democrats, to do that because of the convention. That's their opportunity to really, set the sort of the narrative and the direction of their campaign and lay out what their vision is. And that's something we haven't really had from Harris yet, because she's sort of dodging any major media interviews, which seems to be working for her so far. But has this been because Trump made his VP pick when Biden was still running, I believe, and Trump really kind of set that strategic direction for his campaign on the assumption that he'd be running against Biden. Has there been a huge tactical misstep here? Because the wheels just seem to be coming off the campaign a bit, and JD Vance is not having the impact that I'm assuming Trump hoped he would have. And there's even talk now that Vance could be pulled from the ticket. I mean, considering the drama so far this season, I wouldn't rule anything out. Do you think that's likely?
It's hard to know. I mean, Trump's the disruptor, right? He's never played by the rules, so I suppose anything's on the table. I mean, I think Vance sort of plays into the kind of almost like the Trump mindset. I think he was never going to appeal to the moderates that Trump needs to win over to get to actually win the election, right? Vance appeals to the MAGA crowd. If you listen to what he says, it's sort of all on that brand. So it's not a balanced ticket, and I don't know how much of that was designed to specifically as a kind of tactic against Biden, or how much it is simply a sign of the fact that Trump sees this as his win, right? Almost as if he's entitled to it somehow, and therefore he only has to energize his own base and they'll go out and vote for him, and that's the end of that. He doesn't have to worry about the people who don't like him. But yeah, I mean, Vance is sort of, I'm sure he is still speaking to the MAGA crowd, but he's alienating some of the people that we know Trump is going to need to win over. Now, whether that eventually leads to the dropping of one candidate and another one, it's a flip a coin at the moment. I think Trump's never been terribly predictable.
No. I suppose if I just maybe add to that just slightly, I was thinking all of those things about, it was, strategically smart for Biden to wait until the RNC had run its course before, that whole week was, every headline, every tweet, everything was about the Republicans, because Trump had his, brushed with death on the Sunday, and then there was all the Florida court ruling on the Monday. I mean, that was quite a week for him in terms of he was flying high and dodging bullets in every sense, literally and otherwise. And then comes the kind of the thunderbolt of Trump stepping down, which, as you say, suddenly made the Vance choice look perhaps a little misjudged. But then I couldn't help but think, I mean, there's two things that struck me. One is, like a cynic might say, that, beyond this point in the proceedings, in the medium term, the vice presidential choice doesn't matter very much. I'll just say that in a low voice. It mattered a lot when it was Biden versus Trump for obvious reasons. It matters less now because Harris appears young and well and healthy and all the rest of it, and long may she last. Trump appears bulletproof, as we said, in every sense. His health seems to be pretty robust. So on one level, you kind of think, okay, this is the news story of the moment. But the other side of this for me is that Vance with all his youth, inexperience, and unfortunate, comments from the past that have been dredged up by, various wags, etc. On a serious note, I would say he does personify Trumpism in a way that for the MAGA crowd, and there are a lot of them, and even around the edges. I mean, I know we know that they're the kind of the unhinged people. There are a lot of others who are Trumpist and still, just concerned for their country and maybe have a bit of conventional republicanism still in them, if you like. He is kind of like, to me, the Trumpist future. So Donald Trump will pass eventually, and there will be the next generation. And that's where I see that kind of, Project 2025 personification kind of person going off into the future. And I think, what is Vance, 39? Like, he's not going anywhere anytime soon. So there's that's the other side of that for me, that misstep possibly, but maybe in the longer term, not so much.
Okay. I want to challenge you slightly on the sort of the importance of the VP pick, especially for Trump, because I think one of the problems for his campaign right now is that JD Vance is so MAGA. He's MAGA to an almost unhinged degree. And I don't really think that helps Trump at all, because Trump already has the support of his base. He already has about 65 to 70 million people kind of locked in who are going to vote him no matter what. Vance just speaks to those same people. I think what clearly Trump's problem, and it's been a problem even when he won in 2016 and when he then lost in 2020, is that he cannot win the popular vote. And that means he needs a VP that's going to speak to people that he can't. And I just feel like this doubling down tactic of picking Vance doesn't really help him in any way at all.
Yeah, I can see it from that point of view, but I think Trump's a narcissist, right? It's about him. I don't know. I mean, I don't know him personally, clearly, or anyone who's in his immediate vicinity. So I'm only judging based on sort of his actions and the things that he says. But there's an element of, even if he didn't before, I think he has convinced himself that he did win the 2020 election and that it was stolen from him. It started out, I think, as a convenient argument to make, but actually I think probably he's convinced himself that was true. And you see the campaign fundraising emails that are going out to people. It's like, I love you, I want you to love me back. And I think he's genuinely kind of convinced himself that there are a majority of Americans who will support him. He can't really conceive of those people who won't. And if those people who won't, he doesn't want anything to do with. So I think there's an element here of, I don't know, complacency is not really the right word. But along those lines of him, I think, thinking that more people like him than do, that these polls that suggest that the vote is evenly divided are not accurate, and that all he needs to do is get his crowd out, and that will be that. I think it's a bit of a blind spot in terms of not understanding why people might vote Democrat. And Vance sort of, I think, symbolizes that, right? Not thinking about the idea of the VP pick as bringing balance, about trying to win over those in the swing states. It's almost like assuming that he's already won them, because of course, why wouldn't they vote for him?
I think you're right though when you said about complacency, because Trump was smarter 4 years ago. He picked Pence. In 2016, he picked Pence, and Pence did bring some balance. He brought some political experience that Trump didn't have. He did offer a lot on the ticket, I think. Whereas I think you're right. I think that the narcissism has just taken over, and Trump just maybe feels like he doesn't need to find that balance. He just needs someone who is a younger him.
Yeah, I'm just looking here. I was trying to find a quote that I read in the Michael Wolff book from a while back, Fire and Fury. Now I know that's not exactly a scholarly source, but there's a paragraph in the book, and I'm paraphrasing now, but it was something along the lines of that Trump held his vice president in contempt Trump is known for demanding subservience. And he would expect it and require it, but then he would have contempt for those who gave it. So you have this kind of strange, I'm sure a psychologist could kind of have a ball with this, but the idea that, that he would have the mindset. I mean, as Emma said, the idea of ticket balancing, I don't know that it, Trump too, I don't see any capacity for that or desire for that. It's like he's gone a lot further down the Trumpian road now than in 2016, I would say. I mean, in those, I'm thinking back to like on the campaign trail in 2016, some of those TV interviews, he sounded like a Democrat. I mean, he sounded like Donald Trump, of course, and promoting his own brand and all the rest of it. And this was at a point where no one ever even thought he would win, probably including himself. But just talking about kind of social issues and that kind of stuff, he was quite blasé, quite cavalier. It's a very, very different place now. He has doubled and tripled down on all of those positions with the most intense rhetoric because, he knows who his base is. So I wonder if it was always going to be a doubling down in a way that, that our kind of, US politics textbooks tell us, you can have the doubling down or you can have the balancing of the ticket. And it's a very confident person who doubles down, like Bill Clinton did it with Al Gore, for example. Others don't tend to do it so much, but it's not that much of a surprise, I think, with Trump is my long-winded point.
Yeah. I mean, considering all of this, and I think sort of perhaps from what we've discussed, maybe assuming that Trump probably won't bin off JD Vance unless something very spectacular happens. Where is the state of the race as it stands today? Because 3 weeks ago, Emma, we did this podcast and said it's Trump's to lose. I mean, do you agree that's still the case?
I think it's a much more even balance at this point. I don't think we should get carried away and say, that it's completely overturned things, because what we've got at the moment is sort of the Harris-Walz honeymoon period, right? They're new, they're getting a lot of attention because they're new, and as you mentioned earlier, they haven't, there haven't been any kind of major TV or media interviews yet. They haven't set out policies in any great detail. Those things are going to have to come with the kind of the momentum shift that Clodagh was talking about, probably after the convention, right? They're going to have to get serious about what they would do in government, and there are opportunities there for missteps or to have a policy that you think will jibe with voters, and actually there's a reaction to it. So the one interesting thing also, I think that's not let them off the hook exactly, but given them an easier ride, is the Republicans just haven't managed to work out how to challenge them yet, right? Trump particularly, but the Republican campaign, if you listen to kind of the responses from them, it's recycled language and recycled accusations, radical left, or that's what they said about Biden. Once you start applying that to everybody, it has slightly less power, right? Give them time. There are smart people in the Republican campaign. Give them time, they'll be finding specific things to attack on, and it'll be a question of how far that will resonate with Americans and how skillfully they do that. So I think we're still a very long way out, but I think Biden stepping down and Harris coming in, it's probably leveled the playing field in a way that if we were still talking about Biden, it wouldn't have done. So I don't think we should get carried away, but I think it's a much more open contest than it was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. I mean, I would agree about the honeymoon period at the moment. I suppose there are maybe two things that are two strands that are possibly worth mentioning in relation to where the Democrats could go, because we know Trump pretty well now at this point. We know the playbook. He has evolved very much, as I've said, since 2016 in a whole range of ways. He's always full of surprises. He always knows how to manipulate the headlines, etc. So there's all of that. But there is a newness and a freshness to Harris that, while she's been around the block and she's been, the vice president for a while, and she was the candidate previously, which didn't go so great, etc. There is still more to learn about her and her, her the kind of the relationship that she's going to have with Walz, things about him, just his past. Like, there's plenty still to say and learn and know about him, because, like I said, he hasn't been a particularly well-known figure, nationally. And he does seem to be really quite sort of squeaky clean in terms of when you look through his background, everything, it's National Guard, he was a school teacher. He met his wife and she was a school teacher. I think he's the poorest, or not, that's the wrong way to put it. He's the least wealthy, or one of the least wealthiest candidates ever to run for the vice presidency. Even that, that kind of ties in with that kind of nice Minnesota man type thing. Like, it's authentic. He's not the, kind of archetypal wealthy politician. Far from it. Married for many decades, seems happy, seems grounded, happy family, all of that kind of stuff. So there's all of that to utilize alongside the kind of policy specific. So I think in terms of the news cycle, which is, rightly or wrongly, where so much stuff kind of lives and dies, there's plenty more fodder there to roll out. But that said, of course, it's a long time till November. And again, I think the economy will be extremely important in terms of what people decide in the end of the day. And the final thing I'd say on this is that there's a bit of scope as well for Democrats to pick up votes amongst, younger, kind of more left-wing party supporters that Biden would have really lost in terms of Gaza, and also people that were a bit concerned that he wasn't doing enough on climate, even though he was doing loads. So there's, again, she can push that and kind of remind people that she's not him, that she's not Biden.
Yeah, I think the Israel-Gaza issue is going to be one that she's going to have to find a way of managing, right? Because the Democratic coalition has quite traditionally included many Jewish voters, but also thinking about 2020, a lot of Muslim voters, particularly in the Midwest. And what we were seeing before Biden stood down was a lot of those Muslim voters who are very unhappy about the administration's approach to what's going on in the Middle East. They're not saying they're voting for Trump, but they're abstaining and they're staying home, and they are quite a significant constituency in some of these swing states. So Harris and Walz are going to have to find a way, of addressing that, and it's a very fine tightrope politically for them to walk. I mean, aside from the reality of what is going on there in terms of the American election contest, you've got two constituencies that at the moment do not easily sit side by side, and Trump is going to go all in one way because that's his approach. The campaign is going to have to think carefully, can they keep both on board by walking a tightrope, maybe not giving either side exactly what they're looking for, but finding enough to make the compromise, or do they go all in on one side or the other? But I think that's going to be a key issue as we get into the policy issues. If at the moment it's like setting the mood music, right? Setting the tone of it, eventually they're going to have to get into policies. They're going to have to talk about the economy. They're going to have to talk about foreign policy. They're going to have to talk about security. They're going to have to talk about immigration. They're going to have to talk about all of those issues. We don't yet know what they're going to do, but they're going to be difficult ones for them to deal with.
And I think I'd say that was part of Walz's appeal, wasn't it? That he's Christian. I think he's evangelical Lutheran or whatever a category of Christianity that might be. But, like Shapiro, who would have been very much top of the list in terms of choices. I mean, his stance on Israel is very clear. And I think that would have been unfortunate. I mean, Harris's own husband is Jewish. He's got, quite clear views on what's been going on in Israel. So there's that. There's one important voice there. So she, again, that was another little bit of balancing, I would imagine. So it's not like, I don't think that, I've been looking at the polls on this, that, Gaza is not top of a lot of people's lists in terms of, they're more concerned about the economy, immigration, the border, all that kind of stuff. But for those smaller groups for whom it matters enormously, they are the ones that the Democrats really need to think about, because there might be like 2.5% of the voting public in Pennsylvania. If they're Arab American, they might have quite strong views. So, and those are the kind of little groups that will make or break, somebody's victory.
Yeah, and I think September 10th will be a pretty key date on the election trail, as anyone who may not have heard is now confirmed as the first Harris-Trump televised presidential debate. And I think if not before, that will be the platform on which they are grilled on certain issues like the Israel-Gaza conflict. But we'll be back then to cover that and dissect everything that's said and not said and whatnot. Hopefully no one drops out of the race after this one. We'll also be back next week, next Friday, after the Democratic Convention has ended, to look at the highs, the lows, and everything that's happened there. So do follow and listen to this podcast so the new episodes appear in your feed as we continue our journey towards the presidential election, which is still like 80 odd days away, and yet so much has happened already. It's absolutely mad. Thank you, Emma and Clodagh, for joining me on this one. Before you go, do remind people where they can connect with you and contact you if they want to. Clodagh?
Well, thank you so much. And thanks again for the invite. This has been a total pleasure. I do, as you mentioned kindly at the beginning, I do have a podcast, a monthly podcast with my good friend and colleague, Alex Wadden at Leicester University. So that's called A Chicken in Every Pot. It's on Apple, Spotify and various other platforms. And I'm on Twitter as well. It's Dr. Clodagh, Dr._Clodagh. So if anybody wants to follow me there, be more than happy to follow you back. And thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for being on the podcast. And Emma?
Yeah, if people want to find me, they can search for me at Emma Long at UEA, and they'll find all my contact details there. I remain stubbornly off of social media. So
I applaud you.
Thanks for listening to America, a history in the making. If you enjoy the show, please go and check out our main episodes, which drop every Tuesday, and we've linked to some relevant episodes in the show notes for you as well. Remember also to visit our Patreon page, where you can support our show. For just a few dollars a month, you'll unlock some awesome perks, and it helps us to keep the show going, which we really appreciate. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, in Pod We Trust.